All right, three, two, one. Welcome to the Disinfo Detox, where we cut through the noise to bring you the stories that matter. Today, we're diving into a critical issue that doesn't make enough headlines but affects us all: cybersecurity, digital privacy, and the growing threats to students and families in the digital age. To help us unpack these pressing concerns, we're joined by Claudiu Popa, a cybersecurity expert and co founder of KnowledgeFlow, Canada's only cyber safety education foundation. Claudiu, welcome to the Disinfo Detox.
Hey, thanks. This is great. I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. Of course, in addition to my guest here, I'm joined by my friend, my co conspirator and co host, Allison Butler, is here. Allison, welcome back.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Claudiu, the audience knows that Allison and I have done a lot of work looking at surveillance in education, and we're certainly going to talk about that today. But I want to look at the broader picture because you're a cybersecurity expert. So, can you remind our audience or let our audience know some of the work you've done in cybersecurity?
So, I've been in cybersecurity for about 3 decades. In the interest of time, I can certainly talk about some of the work that I've done here in Canada at the enterprise level, and certainly for government agencies where my team and I have. We run the gamut between doing security research, publishing, education and higher learning institutions, and of course, corporate work and advisory services. So we we come at it from the perspective that anything that is a self-assessment can't be trusted. So we recommend external independent reviews, audits, assessments by qualified individuals. So we always look to build a network of professionals that can validate and help advise school boards and school districts when it comes to data collection, to the use of education technology, to the incorporation of digital tools within the learning curriculum. All that kind of stuff has been central to what we do here in Canada, in addition to the work that we do with nonprofits, with healthcare and medical organizations, with financial and fintech sectors, which, by the way, are tangential to the EdTech sector.
When Allison and I were doing the research for our book, Surveillance Education, one of the things we really tried to figure out was how often these data breaches were happening in schools. And we struggled to be able to even get a number because it's not really, transparently documented. So I wonder if you just, in the broader sense, can you give us kind of an idea of how common these data breaches are?
Sure. I think the key point to make here is that we only hear about the data breaches that organizations are forced to confess to. Here in Canada, it's basically obscurity, and the only time that we hear about data breaches, particularly within public education, is when the public goes out and asks questions. The schools themselves don't report these. They don't necessarily have a program that forces them to report on them. Of course, they have policies which which include guidelines around communications and PR. But one of the workshops that I present for schools, for educators, for principals, for parents groups shows a map of breaches, particularly as a contrast between the USA and Canada. And there's that the map, which you probably have seen before with school board or school breaches in the US. It's an actual map and it's updated every so often with breaches such as they are, because obviously they're always a subset of the actual number of security incidents that occur within the sector. And north of the border is completely blank because there's no tracking and there's no availability to information. So when you're thinking that in the US there isn't, that much availability. In Canada, it's complete obscurity, and we ourselves had to go multiple times to our privacy commissioner, which is the highest authority here in Canada that investigates these things, to essentially force them to investigate certain security compromises within some of the largest school boards in Canada. And it took 2 years, even when they did take up those cases. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about EdTech and about protecting kids in Canada, because that expertise and the interest are both lacking up here north of the border. And in fact, they're lacking everywhere in the world.
So I mean, that just calls to mind so many things that we know that are underreported or underdocumented that ultimately do have an incredibly negative impact on people's lives. One of the things that Nolan and I struggled with when we were working on the surveillance technologies in education book is convincing people that some of these technologies are more nefarious than they are convenient. Yes, they are convenient, but they also have a lot of problems with them too. I want to go back to sort of your opening bid today. You talked about being in cybersecurity for 3 decades. How did you get into this before most regular people like me really even knew what cyber meant outside of like science fiction movies, and maybe thought like you weren't to be taken seriously, and at the same token assumed that security was something that sort of was just happening in person? Like, how'd you convince people that this mattered?
That's a great question, Allison. The word cyber was actually a joke back in the 90s. So back when I started the company at late 80s, early 90s, um, I was in computer science in university. I was I had a business that built computers and started networking them at the dawn of networking. So there's that focus on connectivity. I used to be active on BBSs, which were the closest things to the early internet, bulletin board systems, and and then as soon as 92, 93 came around, this idea of HTML came out, and suddenly we had the World Wide Web, and we started playing around with web design. I remember skipping physics and biology classes to focus on it, but uh, but at that time there wasn't such a thing as cyberspace except in science fiction. And so it was a bit of a joke to call the internet um, cyber, anything cyber. So right up until the end of the last millennium, uh, the idea of cybersecurity was not a serious word. What turned the tide was September 11th, 2001, and everything in the world changed, and there was this focus on defense, there was this focus on protection, and of course it expanded to data protection and cyber espionage, and suddenly we care about information security. So information security became top of mind, and everything else is history. So over time, this idea of cyber caught on, and everybody is all about cyber, cyber, cyber. In fact, I felt bad actually calling my last book the Canadian Cyber Fraud Handbook. It was all about cyber fraud. I had my team of graduate students review literally hundreds of cases of online fraud, digital deception, all kinds of stuff, and we built um, uh, um, a taxonomy of cybercrime, which we made available to law enforcement and to the legal profession, so they are able to classify some of these and actually help the public understand that there really isn't that much complexity to these things. There's the relationship between all of these threats and all of these scams, and that's where everything starts, seeing the commonalities between these nefarious activities. And understanding how to undo them. And one of those that we're talking about today is this idea of data over collection under the guise of something positive. Of course, during the pandemic, this took off because suddenly we no longer had time for due diligence. We just had time to share innovative tools that could help parents and families to expand learning into their own homes. And with that, unfortunately, they also expanded surveillance.
Nolan, if I can jump on that for a quick second, I was just thinking while you were talking about this, that we wouldn't have, certainly the United States, potentially the globe, I'm not sure how big I want to make this statement, we wouldn't have treated COVID the way that we did if it weren't for two very big things, probably three things. One, an inept administration, but we'll let that go for now. Two, digital technologies. And three, September 11th, right? I mean, 9/11 really opened a door, a really big door for surveillance and increased security measures. In your estimation, what do you think is going to have the bigger impact, 9/11 or COVID, on how we sort of move forward?
Let's not forget another big one, and that is Edward Snowden.
Of course.
Back in 2013, when he took off with a whole bunch of documents and illustrated the fact that the government was spying on its own citizens, he also illustrated something major, and that was the beginning of this idea of the cloud, which used to be called the ASP model back in my dinosaur days. And that cloud, which, as a reminder, is always somebody else's computer, that cloud ended up being the foundation of that surveillance state. Every data center in North America is somehow plugged into those core routers and maintained some sort of a connection to a surveillance apparatus. Whether or not the data that is being collected is encrypted is irrelevant. At some point, it'll be possible to decrypt it. It's probably being attempted 24 hours a day, even before we have quantum computing, which is still in its theoretical stages at the moment. But to me, that was a pivotal revelation about the fact that there are motives beyond the pure benefit of the public. There is always an interest in understanding even more about what the public is doing, what they are thinking, what they want, what their intentions are, and where they're going to be in 5, 10, 16 years, or maybe an entire generation. And that generational aspect of the data breaches that we're seeing today in the educational system, that is what I try to bring out every time I write an article or a blog post or give an interview on TV. It's the fact that when you lose student data and you expose children's privacy and communications and various other things that are routinely stored on these systems, that information will serve someone for the next generation or two. As we've seen with the recent power school breach, it goes back a couple of generations. The parents got breached and their children got breached, and all that information is out there for various parties to exploit. And some of those parties are commercial entities, and others are cyber criminals.
You know, one of the things I come across a lot whenever we talk about this subject in public, there's a couple of things I want to bring up. One is folks will talk about VPNs, and I wonder if you can explain, in the in the most kind of basic sense, what a VPN is, and then do you recommend them? Because I've seen conflicting arguments from cybersecurity experts. They always point back to who has access to the VPN or who the VPN operator might be sharing data with. Can you talk a little bit about what a VPN is and what you think they're good for or not good for in terms of cybersecurity?
Yeah, absolutely. A VPN is one of those ambiguous terms that was normalized or that were normalized within a corporate context. Uh, Employees of companies use VPNs in order to connect to their work, to their networks, right? You at work, when you are an employee, you have the cozy, warm and fuzzy perimeter of your business, and your company protects this perimeter using a firewall. In order for you to work from home or from some other place on vacation, you should connect. And in fact, by policy nowadays, practically every company dictates that employees connect using an encrypted method. That encrypted method essentially scrambles the data as the employee connects to their work, poking a hole through that firewall. So the firewall trusts that this connection works properly because, one, it's encrypted, two, it's coming from a known computer that the company has set up, and three, more often than not, it uses more than just a password. It uses a secondary code, which is called multi-factor authentication. So those are trusted connections, and that's what we call a virtual private network. It's essentially an encrypted tunnel that no one can see into, and the employee can cut right across the internet and be inside that warm and fuzzy perimeter of their company. That term has been extended. I don't want to say abused, but it's been used by commercial entrepreneurs and innovators and opportunists to create a network of nodes around the world. So anyone who has access to a computer anywhere around the world can create a relay point. And that relay can allow me as a user to connect to it and then connect to a website that I'm trying to access. That is essentially called a proxy. I'm bouncing through that proxy. So to the website, it looks like I'm connecting from some other country. And that is interesting, but it's not necessarily encrypted. So people have gone out and created these encrypted methods of connecting through some of these proxy servers. And these proxy servers are the most important aspect of what a VPN is and why a VPN can be a problem. In many cases, I'm not going to say in a few, in a lot of cases, some of these VPN providers have nodes or proxies around the world that are untrusted, that might be used for a variety of things, such as sending spam. We don't know who owns them. We know that they're sitting in a closet somewhere. These are computers that exist physically. They may or may not have a virtual machine running on them, but we don't know who owns them. And so when we sign up with a VPN, we really take a leap of faith because it's all based on trust. And in many cases, people just sign up with whatever VPN provider does the most advertising on YouTube, for example. We've seen a number of YouTube channels being subsidized and sponsored by VPN providers that are simply saying, connect through us because we are secure, which seems to be a circular argument. We are secure because we say we are secure. And so we not only depend on the trustworthiness of some of these strangers. Most of these, if not 100% of these companies, are essentially private companies that are running a network of unknown nodes around the world. But we also have no idea to what extent they are collecting logs about who is connecting to their network and who those logs are being shared with, whether it's with the police or it's with advertisers or with cyber criminals. We don't have a foundation for knowing what a VPN, a commercial VPN provider does, and that's why it's such a controversial point. And so that's an excellent question. We've got some interesting. We have one sheet, but we have a number of reference sheets on the KnowledgeFlow website that are available for free download. If anyone's interested, cybersafetyfoundation.org. Just look for VPN and you can download it and get more tips for your group or your school or or your family, etc.
So that actually leads me into that. My question: we get asked a lot by teachers and by students, what do we do? Right? Here's the face of it. What do we do? So, what is, in your estimation, the best way that we can support our teachers, support our students, like help people to get a better idea of where they're living these days?
That's again an excellent question. My favorite thing to do is to speak with um, parent groups.
Hmm.
Parent groups within schools or within school districts. I get invited to speak to them, and I show them the map that I mentioned earlier, for example, which, by the way, I looked it up. It's called the K-12 Cyber Incident Map, k12six.org. I don't know when was the last time that it was updated, but it certainly served its purpose during the pandemic. And that was key because during the pandemic, all of these um, uh, critical thinking approaches just went out the window when schools just started acquiring anything, any kind of technology that came across their desk. So visually displaying to educators the issue with privacy compliance, with the over collection of student data, with the um, concerns related to, let's say, a lack of basic security norms, like a lack of second factor authentication, as we saw in the recent Power School data breach, which was the largest in history. It essentially gave someone, criminal, access to an administrator account with no multi-factor authentication, which is difficult to imagine for a $5.6 billion company to not have that very basic thing in place when every one of us likely has two-factor enabled on our own social media accounts. So, so there's a number of things that I particularly recommend. The biggest thing that I recommend for those receptive schools and school boards that are interested in protecting kids, but also protecting their own reputation. It's a data deletion week. I expect
Mm.
of my school board, I expect the data that's being shared with third parties, fourth parties, cloud providers, integrators, whoever, all these devices that they're putting on tables and various other ways to record kids' activity during the school year. I expect most, if not all, of that information that is being shared with that ecosystem to be deleted at the end of that year. Nobody's asking the school board to delete the records of students and children, right? They're coming back next year. Um, but all of that data that's being shared with the EdTech ecosystem is simply given out to them so that they can monetize it and they can grow their own organizations and their market capitalization. And of course, they often take the opportunity to sell themselves or merge with other companies, as was the case with PowerSchool, which held so much information on 62 million students across generations of individuals. So deleting that data at the end of the year is critical because otherwise you are building linkages and you're doing these completely unauthorized longitudinal studies about kids and students, which are extremely valuable, as you might imagine, to any number of industry sectors without even considering the potential loss to cyber criminals, but just the advertising, the insurance, the financial, banking, etc. Sectors. This is information that parents would never think of giving consent to, and yet that data is going out there. Whether they call it metadata or not, it's still a form of surveillance.
Often whenever we talk about surveillance, we talk about the extent of it and mention how basically smart is code word for surveillance and how this data is tracked and shared and data brokers. Inevitably the question comes up like I'm not doing anything wrong. Why should I care? And so we have an answer for that obviously in the book, but I wonder from your perspective and the work you've done, what would you tell the average person who makes that comment, who says like, what do I care? I'm not doing anything wrong. What are the threats as you see them?
Well, so the perennial argument, I have nothing to hide because I'm doing nothing wrong. So suddenly you're essentially playing into the hands of everybody out there who's trying to make money off of you, who wants you to exercise certain behavioral change because all of a sudden we all know that we are being surveilled. The fact that we now have to worry about everything we do because there's a camera or a microphone or a device on our desk, or we know that the searches that we conduct on Google, and of course we've all seen situations where you do a Google search, and from that moment on you're presented with that kind of ads. um, well, um, that is behavioral change. After that, you no longer do Google searches, you do searches on DuckDuckGo, for example. Um, so giving in to that sort of thing, providing consent for uncontrolled data collection, means that you are giving away some of your civil liberties. And each time you do, that erosion happens not just at the privacy level, but at this more fundamental autonomy level of control that we all should have. For example, I wrote an article for The Conversation, which is an academic publication here in Canada. And I said that parents really need to respect the privacy rights of their own children. When they have a diary, when they log into certain websites, etc., um, teaching them that that is their protected environment and they can trust that their parents are never going to infringe on that, is a great way to teach privacy. It's a great way to enable that trust relationship between parents and children. And it's a great way for them to understand what the human right of privacy is. I was surprised to just the volume of backlash that I got from parents who say, no, no, this is my house until they're 18. There's zero privacy. Zero privacy means I can walk in on them in the shower. I can look, they can come and ask me for their own secret diary. I have all of their passwords and so on. So is it any wonder that kids nowadays are engaged in all sorts of activities that are below these levels that are easily controlled by parents, and they're at levels that parents don't even understand. They log into various websites I'm not going to name, and there's an increase in the amount of gambling online by minors. Parents have no clue how to get into um, these circles and these um, communities. And the reason why they've lost that control is because they breached those very basic norms of decency, which include respect for privacy. And of course, they've eroded the potential for these kids to later on stand up for their privacy rights in the future. I always go into organizations or community groups and I say, look, you have the opportunity to file a complaint with your privacy commissioner. Take that opportunity. It's completely free. They will act on your behalf. But they have, and to go back to your point, Nolan, they have this idea that if they ask and they show concern for their own privacy rights, somebody is going to say, so you have something to hide. And
Mm.
they will be investigated by law enforcement as a result of them simply being concerned about their kids' privacy and the data that they shared with one purpose, but now they're finding out that that information has been shared for the benefit of faceless third parties, or even government agencies that have not actually specified a purpose for that data collection. So yeah, thank you for that question. It all has to do with this relinquishing of um, of control over our own autonomy and human rights. And here, at least where I come from, privacy is a human right.
I also want to ask you about AI. So, with the so-called AI, we've got Gary Smith on the Disinfo Detox, and he's breaking down so-called AI. But I want to ask you on this so-called AI. How has that accelerated or complicated the problems with cybersecurity as far as you see them, with an eye toward reminding people of things they should be aware of in this so-called AI age and what it's doing to their privacy?
Well, one of the issues with AI is that it immediately was considered a very convenient way to take um, the ruins and vestiges of what was called big data, which was a way to extract valuable information and to mine individuals as capital for fun and profit. Once the public found out that big data was essentially a sham, they still needed to make those analytics work, because suddenly we've got an entire society, an entire economy, a global economy that depends on this harvesting of information. It doesn't have to be personal information, it can just be the effort of producing information of any kind. And so AI was a convenient term. Very few people understand what AI really stands for, because AI itself doesn't understand things. It isn't a sentient a mind that we have created. We've created the ability to recognize patterns. And of course, so many of us will say, well, yeah, that's what our brains do. They recognize patterns. But our brains do so much more, we'll argue. We have an identity, we have interests, we have goals, objectives, and we care about things. And so um, we're some ways away from something that is called artificial general intelligence, which is supposed to essentially replace us before realizing that we're imperfect and get rid of us. Um, but what we have today is, unfortunately, a, we are at an inflection point. We have taken a whole bunch of data available across the interwebs. We have used it to train these artificial intelligence models in order to have discussions with us. Some of us humans have actually gotten addicted to the point of being dependent on chatbots, which appear to be so smart and caring. And we've run out of data to train these AIs with. So all we can do is use humanity as a way to create more and more information. That's why there's no availability for non-smart TVs anymore. You have to buy a smart TV. What does it mean? Is there an advantage to a smart TV? Well, there is to the manufacturers, because they are collecting information from you. They watch you as you watch them. They monitor absolutely everything you do, from the second that you turn it on to the second you turn it off, and perhaps even when it's off. I have a little plug that I bought back in 2019, which I'm supposed to plug in my Google Home into. And I ran it through a protocol analyzer, and boy, this thing is chatty. It immediately logs into the Wi-Fi and starts sending out information to its manufacturer nonstop. And it looks at what's on my network and it responds, hey, he's got a brother printer, he's got a computer of this type, this is when he logs on. um, there are some laptops on the network, etc., etc. So nobody tells anybody that these smart devices have to be, if you're going to use them, and I've never actually put it into operation because this thing is just out of your control. As soon as you connect it, you have no control over it. So anything of a smart nature, as you say, is not smart for you. It's smart for somebody else. In the security world, as opposed to the privacy world, smart usually equates with incompetent, because these also have the drawback of not being properly secured. So whenever something is smart, you're likely to have a data breach. These are created to collect information from you nonstop so that it can be added to a massive data warehouse, which can hopefully be used to train some kind of an AI model to predict when people go to sleep, or or worse. So my garage door opener came with a smart remote, and I said, you know what, I'm not even going to read the manual, this is going in the garbage. And so I have a button that opens it and closes it. There's no need for it to be connected to Wi-Fi, so that I can tell the company, or I can add myself to the list of millions of people that are telling the company on what pattern or on what schedule I'm using my garage doors. Anything of a smart nature should be rejected out of hand, and used to basically validate the point that suspicion and um, skepticism are not a form of paranoia, but in fact are simply what we learned from every other smart device out there. It's smart because it's learning from us, not necessarily to benefit us, but to benefit the monetization mechanism that will allow those manufacturers to continue building these tools. And quite frankly, once they collect that information, their only challenge is the fact that they might have made it too reliable. So that built-in obsolescence situation. And of course, we're getting into interoperability and built-in obsolescence. Those are two mechanisms that are really necessary for organizations, for the whole economy. This whole dependence on this churn that many people attribute to the greediest aspects of capitalism. Um, I'm not against it. I'm just against the manufactured, um, one, the manufactured consent, and two, the weaknesses that are now intrinsically built into these products in order for either to justify a subscription based model, or the fact that they just need to sell you another one of these devices every 1 or 2 years. So we can book this for another 7-hour podcast, but for now, I think I'll stop there.
Alison, you want to jump in?
Well, just two quick observations. One, I do love the fact that you have a rotary dial phone on your desk.
Yes, I use it for self-defense as much as communications.
Right. Way to
Yeah.
walk the talk of
They don't
anti-smart.
build them like this anymore.
Right. No kidding. No kidding. But I was thinking when you were talking about, I think these days, with any new technology, we become sort of combination of fearful and fascinated by them, right? And I think to your point of that AI, or Nolan, as you were saying before, like supposedly AI, is so smart, and so new and so otherworldly and all this stuff. I was thinking when you were talking about its repurposing of data, its gathering of data, that maybe one way to dilute some of the fascination with AI, make it seem a little bit less otherworldly, is that AI is to some extent analogous to thrifting. Um, it's repurposing. It's not brand new. It's repurposing stuff that's already out there. And I have nothing against thrifting per se, but it's certainly not our brand new stuff. So maybe we could kind of start thinking about this as a little bit less brand new, um, problematic, troublesome, but less it's actually less of a shiny new object than maybe we've been convinced of it being.
Is that for
Something
me or
I
for
play
Nola?
around with for a little while.
Well, I'm tossing that to you.
Well, so and that's an excellent point, Alison. I think society as a whole is responsible for where we're at today. If you recall, when computers became personal computers, ads basically said, "Put this on your desk and start using it."
Mhm.
A computer is an immensely powerful tool. You don't give someone a car and say, "Okay, see ya. We'll see you tonight." Um, um, when I was connecting with my little 1200 baud modem to the various BBSs, I needed to know everything about this device that I put inside my computer in order to augment its capabilities so that suddenly it could connect. No such thing is happening today. People are not encouraged to understand how their computers work or how a website works. People just assume that you just go to a website and you get something from the website. When I go to a website, I look at the page. In most cases, I don't see very much. And then I start to ratchet down the various controls that I have because obviously I'm going to block JavaScript. Obviously, I'm going to track all the cookies and the various other surveillance web bugs and everything else. And I will only turn it on if I really care about that website or if I trust it. And the way that I can trust it is by analyzing the privacy policy, the way that I can decide whether this website is a threat is by looking at some of the um, mechanisms that it's pushing onto my computer before I'm even allowed to see the page. So, of course, whenever I teach a privacy class at university or at college, every single class I ask the students, I say, what's the opposite of security? And almost no one gets the right answer. And the right answer is convenience. The more we look for convenience and assume that we should have even more comfort than we already have, the fact that I really expect to be able to talk to my light switch means that I'm giving up a certain amount of control, and I'm fine to share this information with someone out there that really cares about the fact that I just talked to my light switch. I want to I don't know why people are okay with having an uncovered front camera on their phones, especially if with the vast rates at which people are going to the washroom with their phones and how much time they're spending on the toilet looking at those phones. And I know that during the pandemic, Zoom was obsessed with understanding facial expressions so that they could feed them into the AI models. And the fiasco that ensued when they tried to understand African faces and the fact that they had to bump up the light intensity for Africans so they can actually see their faces and the racist implications and the bias that that brought along with it. And of course, the PR that they had to engage with and the various acrobatics that ensued. All of those things are things of the past, and now all of that has been normalized and people are just looking at their phone and trusting that the phone is not looking back at them because they have been conditioned in a Pavlovian sense that if there's no light beside the camera, then it can't possibly be looking at you. So we're at an interesting point where we had a chance to understand how technology works, and we had a chance to understand that we have become the product, and because we missed some of that, some of those many chances, right? As you say, COVID was huge. so was the cloud. And of course, it all started with 9/11, and even before 9/11, there was this frantic search for business models that could deliver monetized value from all of the activity that was going on in this nascent information superhighway, as as it was called. Um, we now are on the cusp, on the verge of missing the last opportunity that we have to teach kids to be critical when they look at a device, or when a teacher says, hey, use this website, and don't worry about it, use your own email addresses to log in because we've already set this up for you. I can see that Nolan is triggered.
Yeah.
He's he's holding back, and so these ways of unifying the data that we're feeding into mechanisms are things that should be fought back against. And so I always teach kids, and I say, no, you need to have a unique, a pseudonymous identity every time you log into a new site. And I'll show you how to create a new email address. I'll show you how to track anytime something happens to these addresses. And if I ever get an email on one of these from Have I Been Pwned, for example, I'm going to come down really hard on that one company that should not have had my data because I gave it to that other company. Things of that nature are ways to empower people. Otherwise, what doesn't empower them is, hey, you know what? There's been another data breach this week. And that kind of coverage doesn't help anybody. People have become desensitized because in none of those articles does it actually say what you can do from a practical perspective to have an impact and protect your family once the data has gone out. And of course, the data goes out permanently. You don't recall it. That's the kind of stuff that I always explain to kids, regardless of their age. I literally teach kindergarten kids how to pseudonymize themselves. They come into the classroom and they just want to tell me their name, and I'm like, no, no, just tell me your favorite superhero, and that's going to be your nickname. And we don't take pictures. We teach them that whenever somebody takes pictures of them, they need to talk about permission, and pseudonymization, and some of the fun words to pronounce, because kids love to gamify everything. So cyber situational awareness is one of their favorite words to pronounce in class, and they go home to their parents and they talk about this guy that they saw on TV, and he explained to them that cyber situational awareness is the thing to have. So yeah, it goes fairly deep. I insist on data deletion. I'm trying to organize. I'm trying to get parents to be more not so much more educated as so much more interested.
Mm.
And the way that you interest people is by showing them the impact of failure to act on other people's families as well as on their own families. But of course, recommending annual privacy audits for school boards, digital literacy programs for families, um, the due diligence that has to go into surveillance technology is by definition needs to be transparent. Parents need to have the right to ask about the due diligence that went into this new thing that made an appearance, or the smart board that is in front of their kids. Um, Mandatory vendor privacy agreements. This kind of goes into my privacy company. So I have a privacy company that vets education technology on behalf of some of the best uh, innovators out there, and there are some, and that is really encouraging. Obviously, just basic reminders to use MFA. A few months ago, we discovered that all of the kids in my school have to surrender their passwords to their teachers. And so I had an opportunity to educate the school board's IT department about how this basically undoes every principle of security and trust available to date, prior to submitting the concern to the privacy commissioner. And then, generally speaking, recommending stronger cybersecurity measures that are visible to the community is a great way to build a discussion, not just to build a false sense of security, but to actually encourage a dialogue. I think that's going to make a difference, but it's a tough slog.
Yeah, I think those tips I think are going to be very helpful to folks. I think a lot of what you said resonated when you were mentioning about the camera in the front of the phone. I was thinking about all the new cars that now have cameras facing at the driver and do some biometric stuff to see which way your head is facing, so they can tell whether or not you're using your eyes are on the road while self-driving. So I appreciate all those tips. I think they're going to be helpful. I think the audience is going to appreciate them. As we wrap up here, where can folks follow your work and get more resources? I think you've given so many incredible tips. And where can folks find out more?
3 sites. One, badsecurity.ca. That's my blog, and it includes the Bad Privacy blog, which I maintain in tandem, and I add articles whenever I have the time. There's always a dozen articles that I'm working on simultaneously. The big, important, and very useful site is that of the KnowledgeFlow Foundation. We have a dozen really motivated and passionate young people who produce content that is then presented to users and to the public. And more recently, we've got the KnowledgeFlow Academy. So knowledgeflow.org is the website. Go to the KnowledgeFlow Academy and take any of the free courses. So if you've got teachers, students, schools, school districts, they should all get their badges from the KnowledgeFlow Cyber Safety Academy. It's free, and it just empowers people that much more to understand the difference between having security and privacy or versus having a false sense of security and privacy. And obviously, as far as I'm concerned, people can find me on LinkedIn or even at claudiupopa.com. But thanks very much for what you're doing. This is a fantastic podcast, and it's a great opportunity to get out there. I myself had a podcast a couple of years ago during the pandemic, and that was a lot of fun. I invited educators that were more aware of surveillance, of privacy impacts, and various other issues. Oh yes, it was called the Cybersecure Ed podcast. One word. You can easily Google it. It's archived online, and all that information is still valid. Very cool stuff. You yourselves might get some ideas from listening to some of those, because we interviewed high-ranking people from school boards and lowly teachers, etc., and it was just a fantastic experience. So yeah, thank you for all you're doing. You're doing amazing. I loved reading your work in the past, and I'll continue to do so.
Claudiu Popa, thank you so much for coming on the Disinfo Detox. It's been great to have you. Thank you so much, Allison Butler, my co-host and partner in crime. And I guess surveillance capitalism is not that bad, because Claudiu, without LinkedIn, we wouldn't have been introduced.
That's right.
Hey, Detoxers. Thanks for tuning in. You can find Disinfo Detox on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Don't forget to like, follow, subscribe, and share. Every click helps grow the community and keeps those tech overlords happy. Detox complete.